the keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Ready to talk about Oregon draft targets because John Lynch went to Oregon to watch their pro day, and with him came 8 other 49ers scouts and brass that are going to watch these Oregon prospects. And you might ask, why such a contingency to go to Oregon? Well, Oregon had one of the best football teams in the entire nation this past season. And so there's plenty of players to go look at. So I thought this might be a fun process to see who John Lynch was scouting, because there is a possibility that someone from Oregon could end up on the San Francisco 49ers. The fact that they scouted, and saw them in person, it could mean a lot. This is where you can learn a little bit extra about how these players move, how these players operate in space, and if the film matches what you see when you see them in person. It doesn't make you decide that you like a player, but it can confirm what you already thought you knew about that player. Plus, you get to see John Lynch have communication with linebacker Jeffrey Bosa. And so they had a long conversation. People documented how long that conversation was, and they decided that he's a potential target for the 49ers. And I think they're spot on. The 49ers do need linebacker help, but he's not the only one that's there. Of course, in my recent mock draft, I took Derek Harmon, defensive tackle from Oregon. You're talking a big physical athlete who had transferred from Michigan State to Oregon, who used to be 340 pounds, that now goes around 313 pounds. He got more athletic, he got faster, he got capable of being able to put pressure on the quarterback more consistently, and he's a guy that produced 5 sacks last season. But he's also a guy that, and I know there's been some pushback, can stop the run at a pretty high level. And he might not have been the best at all times, but last year against Ohio State, he had a 92 PFF grade against the run. I would say that shows capabilities of being able to stop the run at a high level. And I think he's a pretty good run stopper compared to some of the other defensive tackles in this draft, and I think he has a potential to get even better. But the players that the 49ers saw in person is just a tremendous list. And I want to go through a lot of these guys and break them down. Let's talk about what we like about these guys, if they're options for the 49ers, where potentially they could go in the draft, because they're kind of sprinkled from rounds 1 through 7 about where you could potentially get some of these guys. Now, there are so many eligible players in the NFL draft from Oregon that I don't know if I'm even going to make through all of them on this. Of course, some of these guys I have broke down over on Patreon. You can go check those out. It's a lot of fun. There's some I still got to get to. I'll be letting you know because there's a list right now. I got people on Patreon saying, hey, I want to see these players. So I've got players that I'm going to be breaking down. Some of them are set to come out. I'm also getting into some of the defensive linemen, guys like CJ West. That was requested. That's going to get broke down over on Patreon too. So if you like extra breakdowns, go check it out over on Patreon. But we're going to be breaking down guys like Derek Harmon and Jordan Birch and Josh Conerly and Terence Ferguson and Jeffrey Bosa and Jordan James and Jamari Caldwell. And that's not even half the list, because this team is absolutely stacked and talented at Oregon. But please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And of course, it is tournament time. So if you're watching the tournament, you're engaging in it, it's time to join BetOnline and bet on all of it. Have a lot of fun betting on basketball, because BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to hat trick, BetOnline is you cover with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. And so I'm not going to talk extensively about Derek Harmon because I've done a lot of conversation about him already. But I will say this: Derek Harmon is a legit possibility for the 49ers in the first round. New mock draft came out just, yesterday that had Derek Harmon going number 11 overall to the 49ers. Of course, in my mock draft, we traded back to pick 22, I believe, and then we took Derek Harmon there. It was great value, got a really good football player, and he's a guy that produced last year. 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 45 tackles. He was a disruptor. All of his athleticism has showed up in the process, a 4.95 40, which is tremendous, but also a 34 3/8 inch arms and a 174 10-yard split. All of this at 313 to 300 and potentially 15 pounds. I'm guessing he placed at 320 in the league. All illustrates that he can do it all in the NFL. He can be a really good pass rusher. Also has the ability to be a good run stopper as well. Take on double teams. He's more stout and could potentially do a lot of those things for your football team. So I guarantee you John Lynch was getting an idea of what Derek Harmon was capable of. This is going to be one of the number one players the 49ers scout from Oregon. The 49ers right now have a decision to make at pick 11. There are edge rushers they could decide on. They could potentially hope Mason Graham falls. I think that's unlikely. Then your decision comes down to probably 3 or 4 defensive tackles. And Derek Harmon could be the leader in the clubhouse. I think Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, Tyleik Williams, and also Kenneth Grant. Those are the 4 names right now that could be in the mix for pick 11 when you're looking at defensive tackle. And Derek Harmon might be at the top of that list. So he's a very, very interesting guy. He's got the ability to get in the backfield and penetrate and make all kinds of plays for your football team. So I'm a huge fan of Derek Harmon, of course. And I think he's got the potential to be a really, really good player. I got him, at a 90 overall when it comes to pass rush. I think he does a really good job there. I've got his run defense not quite as high, but I think he's like an 85 overall when it comes to run defense. There's got to be a little bit of improvement, but I like the size. I like the speed, and the fact that he went from being 340 pounds to 313 pounds for the combine. So one season, I think last year he said he played at 320 pounds for the Oregon Ducks. I think that's going to give him a lot more lateral quickness. Yes, it will hurt him a little bit when it comes to run stopping, but he's plenty big enough to play the 49ers 3 tech. And so I think Derek Harmon could be somebody the 49ers are interested in, but definitely somebody that they were watching. That's for sure. The next up I want to talk about, as I'm going to kind of go by players I think the 49ers could have extreme interest in, is Jeffrey Bosa. And Jeffrey Bosa, linebacker, is a guy that is just, twitched out. This dude has been putting in the work. He's gotten really, really thick. And he looks like a guy that, could be a potential target for the 49ers in the mid rounds. 6'1", 232 pounds. So he'd be undersized for a lot of teams that are looking for linebacker help. But for the 49ers, he doesn't, right? They don't worry about height. Dre Greenlaw, not very tall. When you're looking at Fred Warner, not very thick. Fred Warner goes 235 pounds. So they're not going to be as concerned about thresholds when it comes to playing linebacker. And that's why Jeffrey Bosa in the mid-rounds makes sense because of some of the ways that he plays. He's also fast enough. He ran a 4.63, which is very Fred Warner-esque, as Warner ran pretty close. But the thing you like about him is his 10-yard split is a 1.59, which means he moves, and that's one of the things you need to have when you're going downhill and you're making plays. You got to be able to move. I wish that his lateral quickness would have been a little bit better, but overall, he's a fun prospect, and he does a pretty good job tackling. Nothing elite, right? Nothing that measures, off the charts that you're going to take notice of, but he's a very solid linebacker that can make plays for your football team. And I think when you're looking at Jeffrey Bosa, what's his number one trait that you absolutely love? It's got to be the way that he feels and plays in coverage. I think that's what shows up the most when you're watching him. Just the feel that he has for routes, the way that he understands leverage, the way he understands windows, and how he's able to make plays on footballs that come into his window. And I think that all that knowledge is going to be very beneficial to a player that would love to translate into playing a will linebacker in the NFL is having those capabilities to understand what route concepts are coming, what kind of leverage they're using, so that way he can get into the right spots and make plays with his hands. He's also a very fluid mover, and you can see that really well in his hips, so he's able to run with guys and move with guys. That's important when making drops in coverage, but also that's important for being able to go underneath blocks and be able to shed blocks and make tackles. If you can flow, a lot of times you can beat an offensive lineman to a spot. You can get low and go underneath that and make some plays with some unique moves. So I think he's got the potential to do that. He also is a former safety. So what do we know about the 49ers when you look at what they usually do at linebacker? They like to find former safeties. Right off the top of my head, I can mention 3 former safeties they've turned into linebacker, and it's been more than that. But Fred Warner, Azeez Al-Shire, and Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles were all safeties in college who developed into linebackers for their football team. For Fred Warner and Azeez Al-Shire, 2 of the best linebackers in the NFL. I think Azeez, not quite, where Fred is, that's of course, but still a very formidable linebacker. And Bosa's made in the same mold. That's part of the reason he's so good when it comes to coverage, when it comes to his eyes and recognizing what's coming. And that's why he's going to be very much loved by a lot of teams as they see a guy that can do a lot of things and be able to take some of the routes that other linebackers would struggle with, including vertical routes down the seam, because he has played safety in cover 2. That will help him a lot. He has really good hand usage, so he's able to take on blockers and disengage and make tackles, stack and shed linebacker. Even though he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, he's got really capable technique to be able to stack and shed and make tackles, so he does a good job. I'm a fan of him. I think that he's just an absolute dog. I think that if you get into the mid rounds, you get to round 4 and you haven't hit on linebacker, I think Jeffrey Bosa becomes a real option. And that's why it was so important for John Lynch to go get, on site and watch some of these guys. Derek Harmon, Jeffrey Bosa. He's got the ability to make a lot of things happen. Now, it's not all great for Jeffrey Bosa, right? There's still things that he needs to work on. I think when you look at him, he's a little undersized. So he's going to struggle in the strength department. If an offensive lineman is able to get him in a good area, he could get him to, a nice block and be able to stop him. Sometimes he will be a little bit too aggressive and he will over pursue and he will leave cutback lanes open. This is pretty consistent with a lot of linebackers. When you're the backside guy, you have to make sure you stay home. And sometimes, he struggled with that a little bit. So I think that those are a couple of things that he will have to overcome. But we've seen linebackers be able to do that in the 49ers system. So Jeffrey Bosa could be a 49ers target in the mid rounds, 4, 5, 6. We'll see. I think he's a potential hit for the 49ers. So Derek Harmon, potentially round 1. I don't know if he would fall into round 2. We would see. That's going to be interesting to see how round 1 plays out. But Jeffrey Bosa, potentially a day 3 pick for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, a guy that I did a breakdown on over on Patreon, but I haven't talked about him a whole lot on the channel here, is Josh Conerly, the offensive tackle, 6'5", 311 pounds. He ran a 5.40. Now, we know the 5 and we know the 40 times don't really matter as much for offensive linemen. You're just getting an idea of their athleticism. But a 10-yard split of 1.71 is just really fast. And it just goes to illustrate that he fits a zone scheme, right? He can play in pretty much any scheme, but a zone scheme matches Josh Conerly's skill set. And when you have that quick 10-yard split, you can get to the second level and you can beat linebackers to their spot. That's going to help significantly. And it's necessary to play in Kyle Shanahan's scheme to have more athletic offensive linemen. And Conerly is one of the better ones. And I think where Conerly becomes a real option for the 49ers, and I'm sure he's on their board and they're probably pretty high on him, is the fact that he does measure out where he can play offensive tackle. He had 33.5-inch arms, which for a lot of teams wouldn't be long enough, right? There's a 34-inch threshold. For the 49ers, that's not the case. Colton McKivitz doesn't have 34-inch arms. Would they love it? Yes, but it's not necessary. So Conerly can be seen as a offensive tackle option for the San Francisco 49ers. So he could go in, he could step in day one and challenge Colton McKivitz for right tackle. He could be the eventual replacement for Trent Williams. Do I think that he's an elite talent? No, I do not. Do I think he's a very serviceable tackle? I do. I think that he could step in and be very serviceable, which makes him a option to be your swing tackle in year one, and then your eventual replacement for Colton McKivitz next year if he elects to leave in free agency. You've always got the potential of putting Conerly in at guard as well. I think the only concern I have about Josh Conerly playing inside at guard is the fact that he doesn't have as good an anchor as some of the other guys. And that means that he goes against, 320, 330 pound defensive tackles. They might be able to walk him back and collapse the pocket a little bit more. The anchor's not terrible. It just would be a little bit more difficult against a bigger defensive tackle. We're out on the edge going against edge rushers who usually max out 275, 280 for the biggest of edge rushers. Those guys he could hang with when it comes to anchor. He also has the speed to be able to stay in front of them. He's got a clean slide. He's got pretty good hands. There's a lot to like about Josh Conerly when it comes to technique, and there's some things that I think work for him well on the outside. I wonder how much of that translates to the inside. One of the reasons that Dominic Puni really worked playing offensive guard was the fact that he had such a great anchor. And so that's one of the unique things you have to have if you're going to be an offensive tackle in college and go to play the interior offensive line in the NFL. You have to have a consistent anchor. You have to be able to just sink those hips, roll underneath, and prevent one of these defensive tackles from walking you back. Because the worst thing you could possibly have for a quarterback is no space to step up and make a play. So I think if there was a concern for me when it came to Conerly, it would be that. The athleticism's there. The skill set is there. He's got a lot of ability, and he's a very, very good pass protector. Probably one of the better pass protectors in the front part of this draft. I think if you were just going on pass protection, he would be up there with some of the top names and probably be mentioned in the first round. He also does a really good job making sure he doesn't bend from his waist. That's one of the negatives of offensive linemen. You see it with several guys. Cameron Williams from Texas being one of those guys. They get a forward lean with their waist. They don't stay back. They're not knee benders. When you have that, you will lose your pad level. You'll stand tall, but also you're easy to lose your balance because you're leaned forward. And a lot of defensive players will just snatch you and throw you aside. So Conerly does a really good job with that, and that's part of the reason I think he will do so well in a zone scheme. The other thing is the athleticism to be able to win outside and on the second level against more athletic, smaller defenders. He's got the capabilities to move laterally, stay in front of them, mirror them, but also the ability to block them and put them in the ground. So he's a very good player. I think that he would make a lot of sense for the 49ers. He's got good footwork. He's got good change of direction. He's got good makeup speed. There's a real good chance that he would be there at pick 43. That he would be the pick at 43 if he was available. There's a chance he goes earlier than that, but I think that he needs to get a little bit better when it comes to run blocking. He doesn't create movement at the point of attack. That's not really what he does. That's why I think he's better suited for the zone scheme than a gap scheme, where you got to get some movement at the point of attack. But a good player, and I think the 49ers were definitely watching him, and he's got the right size, 6'5", 311, the athleticism. So Josh Conerly could be another guy the 49ers are interested in from Oregon. Now let's talk about a tight end. And I did a breakdown over on Patreon. I talked about him recently on an episode where I broke down the tight ends the 49ers could be interested in. And that's Terence Ferguson, who is one of my favorite tight ends in this entire draft. I like his athleticism. And I think when you look at the current makeup of the 49ers roster, you got George Kittle. He's a do-it-all tight end. And that is wonderful. You got Luke Farrell, who's a blocking tight end. Doesn't really do a lot when it comes to catching the football. Not very effective. A lot like the Charlie Warner role the 49ers had before. And so they need a move tight end. Jake Tunges is not a move tight end. The guy is not really developed yet. He's a guy that's really working to try to develop into a tight end. But right now, we haven't seen any dividends of that. He hasn't been a great blocker. He hasn't really been a receiver. He didn't play a lot last year. So they could definitely improve on that position. And then I think you look beyond that, and Braden Willis was a 7th-round pick out of Oklahoma a couple years ago. And we saw them move on from Cameron Latu, who was going to be the move tight end. But Braden Willis hasn't really developed into that guy either. He had moments where he shined on special teams, moments it was a struggle, but he just hasn't been consistent. So the 49ers could easily draft a third tight end that can move in. And I know what people are going to say, what about Mason Pline? I think Mason Pline still got a lot of time that he needs to put into developing. I like the body. I like the size. I just don't think he's going to be capable and ready. They never called him up. They never gave him any opportunities in preseason. I just think he's got a long way to go. But Terence Ferguson does not have a long way to go. This is a guy that can win inline. He's a guy that can win off ball. He's a guy that can win split outside in the slot. There's versatility. And his skill set is different than what you're going to get from Luke Farrell, which means that you can use these guys in different categories. But also, he's a guy that could develop and becoming a better run blocker and be able to win inline and at the point of attack. And we're going to see George Kittle continuing to get older. He's still playing at a really high level. I'm not ready to usher him out, but getting a guy like Terence Ferguson that could step in and potentially help your football team and develop into a complete tight end, I think it's something the 49ers should be interested in, because when you look at his size, he's 6'5", nearly 250 pounds. He ran a 4.6 340, plenty fast enough. Is he George Kittle fast? No. But is he plenty fast enough for the position? Yes. That means he can push the seam. That means he can beat linebackers one-on-one. That means he can compete with safeties in this league. He's got enough speed. He's able to create separation. I love the way he gets in and out of his breaks at the top of his route stem. He just does a really good job as being a good route runner. He was productive at Oregon last year. 43 catches for 591 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, the measurables are just there. The 4.6 340, the 39-inch vertical leap, the 1.55 10-yard split. He's just got explosiveness, and it's a guy that you see on film can create in the open field, and that's what you want to get from your tight end. And he's got the prototypical size, the 6'5", the 250 pounds. He's got the ability to present a large catch radius. He's got long arms, a long wingspan. He can go snatch the ball out of the air, which is exactly what you need. He can also run a lot of routes. He's got the capabilities. He's got the vertical threat, which means that the underneath routes are going to be a little bit easier. He produces yards after the catch. I would say that he probably doesn't have as much contact balance as I wish he had, because he does go down a little bit easier than I thought, but he competes, he battles, he fights for every yard, which I love him. So that's one of the things I like about him. The separation, he does create separation at a high level. He has been a red zone threat throughout his time in college because he's able to box out, he's able to high point footballs, and he is a willing blocker. When you say someone is a willing blocker, it means they'll give the effort and they'll work hard. There are some players that won't give you that effort. They just kind of stand around or make contact and let go. That's not what you're getting here. Terence Ferguson battles. He competes. He drives his feet. He works, which means if you're a willing blocker, better technique, better work in the weight room, all of those things can make you a better blocker. So taking a Terence Ferguson and saying, okay, I'm going to put you with George Kittle. I want you to go to tight end U. I want you to go to Nashville, and I want you to work with George Kittle, and he's going to help develop you. I think he would be just a really good developmental piece for George Kittle to mold. And yes, I'm not expecting George Kittle to teach him everything, but he could learn from Kittle, and I think his blocking would increase and enhance very quickly with the type of mentality the 49ers have for their tight ends. I think he would, fit in well. So I really like him. I think the criticisms are going to be mainly when it comes to blocking, but initially you're not drafting him to be a very consistent blocker. You're drafting him to be able to produce when it comes to catching the football, a la Ross Dwelley. And I'm talking Ross Dwelley 2019, not the subsequent years after that. So I think that this would be a dynamite pick for the 49ers. I'm sure they took a look at him because, I mean, he is just a very, very impressive talent. I'm a huge fan of Terence Ferguson. I think if the 49ers took him with, pick 100, pick 113, I think that would be just a tremendous value for tight end. And I mean, the names just don't stop for Oregon. We've already went through Harmon and Conerly and Ferguson and Bosa, and we haven't even got to a couple of guys that I want to get to. So I'm going to make sure I get through at least a couple more guys because I think there's some very talented guys. And one of those guys is Jamari Caldwell, defensive tackle out of Oregon. 6'2", 332 pounds. Ran a 5.16, which got some athleticism. 0 sacks. That's not really what he does. So when you're looking at Jamari Caldwell, he's kind of in that mold of some of the other guys, the bigger, the more plug type defensive tackles. That's what you'd be getting. He's a guy that doesn't move. He doesn't get moved. He plays the run very tough. And so that's what you're getting out of him. You're not getting a 3-down player, you're getting a very good 2-down player. And there's other players in this draft that are a lot like him. And I think, he's not one of the guys that's going to be towards the top of the draft, but I also don't think that he should be as low as a lot of people have him. So when you're talking about guys that are more like him, you're talking about Alfred Collins. He's one of those guys, CJ West, Jordan Phillips, then you've got Jamari Caldwell. But I think Jamari Caldwell's better than a guy like Deion Walker. Deion Walker's got his own zip code, which is tremendous. The guy's an absolute stud when it comes to size. But I think when you're looking at speed and agility and athleticism, Jamari Caldwell plays with better leverage. He plays with lower pad level. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of teams are really going to like about him. We know the 49ers do like the shorter defensive tackle. They have no problem with it. DJ Jones, Kalia Davis, guys who are a little bit shorter but can play with leverage because they can play with the low pad level. And that's something that going to training camp, I see Chris Kasarik preach nonstop, low pad level. Javon Kinlaw in his rookie season, all he did was hit the bag for a while. It just felt like that was all he did. And they just preached low pad level, low pad level, low pad level. So he's not going to test well at all. Jamari Caldwell was not impressive with anything at all. Doesn't have long arms. He doesn't have a good vertical. He didn't have a good 40. He doesn't have a good 10-yard split. What he does, though, is stop the run. And that's exactly what you would be getting when you're looking for a guy that can play your 1 or your 0 technique. A guy that can take on a double team, plug the middle, and allow your 3 tech to get off the block and make a play in the backfield. You got a disruptor and you got a plug. And of course, they could always double team your disruptor and allow your plug to go one-on-one. But Caldwell shows the necessary athleticism, the lateral quickness, and the skill set when it comes to handwork to be able to win on those one-on-one situations. You definitely don't want him on 3rd and 8, for instance. That's not going to be a strong suit. But 3rd and 2, you absolutely want Jamari Caldwell on the field ready to make a play. So he's one of those guys that can do it. He does have a very good stack and shed technique, and he wins against one-on-one blocks pretty consistently. So that allows him to make plays in the run game. That's why I like him. I think that he could be even better with a little bit of work. He can even be more tremendous and more physical. And so the weaknesses for him are going to come down to the arm length. The weaknesses are going to come down to the pass rush repertoire, or the lack of moves that he has. But all those things can become better when it comes to repertoire. You're not going to get longer arms, but you can get a little bit different techniques, a little bit more strategic on when your strikes happen. Use your lateral quickness to your advantage. Throw in some counter moves. And I think that he shows the ability to be able to do that. So Jamari Caldwell in day 3, you're talking, rounds 4, 5, 6, probably round 5. I mean, this could be another one of those round 5 steals for the San Francisco 49ers. I like him a lot. I think he's very talented, very good run defender. I think when it comes to the pass rush, that's going to be the question mark. The other thing that he has to do at a higher level, and this is something that a lot of the players you draft in this draft are going to have to get better at, is finishing. Defensive tackles, finishing in the backfield, and that's something that he's going to have to get better at, that tackling. But Jamari Caldwell is a solid prospect for the San Francisco 49ers in this draft. So what about a edge rusher? Well, they've got Jordan Birch, and another guy that I haven't had the opportunity to really talk about. But he's a big physical edge rusher, and he was very productive as well. 6'4", 279 pounds. He ran a 4.67, which shows tremendous straight line speed for a defensive end at nearly 280 pounds. I mean, that's ridiculous. You think about him, if he was 250, like some of the other guys, Donovan Ezeraku, Mike Green. I mean, this guy could have easily ran in the 4.5s, but he's 280 pounds. Got to take that into consideration. Freak athlete, 8.5 sacks last year, 1 forced fumble, 31 tackles. Just a good season. Overall, this defensive line was pretty darn good. You're talking Caldwell, you're talking Derek Harmon, you're talking Jordan Birch. It's a good group. So let's take a look at his measurables a little bit. 33-inch arms, not tremendous, but still pretty good. His 10-yard split wasn't great either, which means he picks up speed as he goes. Not that elite first step. Wasn't a great run defender, so that's something he's got to get better at, setting the edge. But he is a good pass rusher, being able to get there. There's a lot of guys, that have been in the league that have had similar size and athleticism and been very productive. And I think he's one of those guys. He clocked in once at 21 miles per hour, weighing, over 280 pounds, which is crazy to think. He's just a very impressive player. He's got natural power. He's able to convert that speed to power. So speed rush up, get you open up, you flatten out your slide, and he can get right into your chest plate and drive you right back into the quarterback. So the mixture of speed and power is there, which, I'm a huge fan of. He's got a high motor, which means he fits the 49ers system. There's usually things the 49ers look for when it comes to defensive linemen, and high motor is one of them. A elite first step is one of them. He doesn't have elite first step, but he has natural speed to power changeover, which means he'll also be a target for the 49ers because of that reason. And Chris Kasarik loves the guys that just don't stop. And that's one thing that he does pretty well. Another thing he did well was bat balls down. He had 6 batted balls last season in 2024. And he also does a very good job of making tackles with under a 12% missed tackle rate. So he finishes when he gets to you. So there are things to like about him. He's not one of those guys that technically is the most sound, but he's still very consistent, does a pretty good job. I think he could get better when it comes to his pass rush production, but 8.5 sacks is nothing to really cry about. I mean, that's really good. And I think that he needs to get better when it comes to his pass rush plan. It's just not all there. Right now, he's relying more on his athleticism than his technique. And that's what I was saying. The technique's not all the way there. So he's got to get a little bit better. The run game has got to get a little bit better. He can get washed. He loses gap integrity, and he will sometimes lose ground. And at 280 pounds, that shouldn't happen. He should be able to get a low center of gravity and take these guys on and set a hard edge. So that's something that Jordan Birch is going to have to get better at. And the crazy thing is there's still tons of players that I didn't get to talk about from Oregon. So maybe I'll find time on another episode. A guy like Tez Johnson, the small wide receiver who tore up the Senior Bowl and got everyone's attention. The running back Jordan James, who could be a late round pick that a lot of teams are going to be fans of. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback, probably going to be a backup in the NFL, but has thrown for a lot of career yards and did a great job. Johnny Cornelius, an offensive tackle. I wish I could talk about him. I'll have to talk about him on another offensive line because I'm going to talk about day 3 offensive lineman, and Johnny Cornelius could be a very interesting one, whether he's playing tackle or guard. Jabbar Muhammad, the cornerback, he's another guy that could be a interesting pick for the 49ers in day 3. All those guys still got to talk about, but that's why John Lynch was out there in Oregon, in Eugene, looking at these players, because there's so many talented guys that the 49ers could be interested in, and why it was important to go through a video where we talk about the guys from Oregon, because there's just so many talented players that the 49ers are likely to walk away with somebody. Will it be Harmon in round 1? Can't say for sure. It could be Walter Nolan. It could be Tyleik Williams. It could be Kenneth Grant, right? Maybe Mason Graham falls. or the 49ers decide to go to another position entirely. But could it be Jeffrey Bosa in early day three, as a potential linebacker help for this 49ers football team? Potentially. You look at a guy, at the tight end position that you could potentially get with Ferguson. Maybe Ferguson could come in there and make some plays and be that move tight end you're looking for. So lots of talent potentially for the 49ers to hit on. Let me know what you guys think about the Oregon group overall, this 2025 NFL draft class. Which ones would you love to see on the 49ers? I'd really appreciate your input. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. This episode was brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.